Oh, ladies and gentlemen from the fallopian tubes. I can remember quite vividly. Around 2 p.m. on a very sunny Friday afternoon a couple of years ago, the very famous and wealthy Chief ARIKUYERI was on a journey to attending an important business meeting in a neighboring town. In his very comfy and palatial Mercedes-Benz SL Class R230, and together with one of his drivers called Ikumakpai, were involved in a ghastly car crash along a metropolitan highway. It's quite sad. Almost immediately this unfortunate incident occurred, Chief ARIKUYERI, Ikumakpai, amongst other victims, were rushed to the accident and emergency unit of a nearby hospital by empathetic passers-by and compassionate bystanders. On getting to the hospital, considering the order of fatality and the severity sustained by Chief ARIKUYERI, he was transferred to the intensive care unit of the hospital for a much more better comprehensive medical attention and an intensive surgical intervention. Well, then, when I went through his case file, his diagnosis revealed to me that he was a victim of lots of mechanical traumas, which caused him hypovolemic shock as a result of the bleeding, that is the hemorrhage, in the course of the road traffic accident. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may ask you, you really want to know some of the mechanical traumas this man was a victim of? You want to know? Okay, just so you know, he had a fracture to his skull, and this is a combinated fracture of his skull. Do you know that this bony broken fragment actually lacerated some part of his brain, specifically his occipital lobe and his cingulate gyrus, and also his parietal lobe, and resulting in an internal bleeding in the skull, which according to neurological parlance is regarded as hematoma in the intradural space. And unfortunately, this actually culminated in clinical manifestations like concussions, disorientations, impaired proprioceptions, confusions, and balloting. What I really mean is that he had this subconscious state of mind, and also he had these uncoordinated muscular reflexes and spasms, and also he had this pathological increase in his intracranial pressure. Ladies and gentlemen, do you really think that's all this man called Chief ARIKUYERI really had? Not at all. He really had a very fatal accident, for crying out loud. More so, he had a trauma to his zygomatic bone that is quite close to his eye, and this caused him partial blindness of the eye, which according to ophthalmological jargon is regarded as hemianopsia, amongst all other visual deficits he incurred. And in addition, he also had a very tough hit to his ear, specifically his external auditory meters and his internal auditory meters, and this caused him a sense of imbalance, that is disequilibrium. He also had this poor sense of spatial orientation, that is impaired proprioception, and most importantly, he had a distortion in his sound perception, which according to etymological vocabulary is regarded as dysacresis. More so, he had a trauma to his rib cage, and this caused him a fracture of the rib, and you know that some of these fractures of the rib actually perforated his lungs, resulting in a bleed in the lungs, that is hemothorax, that is blood in the thorax, meaning that there was a blood effusion from the lungs into the pleural cavity, and unfortunately this culminated in difficulty in breathing, which according to pulmonological argot is regarded as dyspnea. Then finally, he had a gash, a very deep wound in his intestine, resulting in intestinal seepage, that is the moving out of intestinal content from his intestine to the intraperitoneal space of the abdominal cavity, the peritoneal cavity. Ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me that Chief ARIKUYERI really faced a lot. Chief ARIKUYERI faced a lot, like he experienced hell on earth. And fans mi, ẹ tẹ̀jẹ́ ká kọ́kọ́ gbé ìgbé yìí lẹ́nu ká bára wa tàkùrọ̀sọ ká bára ní gbólóhùn. Kí ló ṣẹlẹ̀ gan ní pàtó sí Chief ARIKUYERI? As a matter of fact, Chief ARIKUYERI, olóyè ARIKUYERI, ó rí ipò that is Chief ARIKUYERI actually beheld side of death. Àmọ́, ṣé Yẹrí ṣá was able to evade its presence? You want to know? Ẹ fẹ́ mọ̀? Like you really want to know? Ẹ fẹ́ mọ̀ tó ṣẹlẹ̀ gan ní pàtó sí olóyè Chief ARIKUYERI? Okay, no problem. Follow me as I take you on a journey into the story. Ó dáa, kò sí ìyọnu. Ẹ tẹ̀lé mi ká lọ bí a ti ṣe ń tẹ̀síwájú nínú ìrìnàjò ìtàn yìí. Shortly afterwards, the very disturbing news of the life-threatening accident that Chief ARIKUYERI was involved in pervaded the whole cosmopolitan city like a wildfire, because it was indeed a very noble bigwig in the society as at the time. Yes, after a short while, that the unconscious Chief ARIKUYERI was hospitalized in the intensive care unit of the hospital and placed on ventilators and resuscitated with defibrillators, his stepbrother, Barrister Safejo, alongside the retinue of chief workers, actually stormed the medical center, the hospital, to actually ascertain how chief was faring and responding to medical attention. So, when the hospital management managed to confirm that Barrister Safejo was related to Chief ARIKUYERI one way or another through family ties, it was requested of him that he signed all official documents of agreement and paid every necessary dues amongst all other levies for the commencement of the surgery, which he actually did at the drop of a hat. So, having fulfilled all necessary prerequisites by Barrister Safejo, Chief Arikuyeri was prepared by the nurses and taken to the surgical theatre for a much more comprehensive medical attention and intensive surgical intervention. Be very careful, multidisciplinary actually, because it was actually undertaken by a consortium of adept clinical specialists and medical experts across the multifarious fields of surgical specialty and subspecialty. So at the commencement of the surgery, Barrister Safejo was just, peripatetically ambulating in the wall quay that was just right along the vestibule in front of the surgical theatre with the signature of fear and impatience written all over him, despite the fact that he had a very, very itchy ear for a good news. Yes, just to, keep all hopes alive by keeping his fingers crossed. Furthermore, after a very long session of the surgical operation, Dr. Boughz walked out of the surgical theatre with the atmosphere of exhaustion and tiredness hovering all over him. But to his greatest surprise, he was accosted by an onslaught of inquiries, interrogations, interviews, questionings, or whatever you want to call it, from both Barrister Safejo himself and the retinue of chief workers, just to elicit information about him, about what is going on in the surgical theatre. But Dr. Boughz kept mute about his updates in an attempt not to incite any fear, trigger any tension, or activate any frenzy whatsoever, and he paved the way within the halls of chief workers and chief's acquaintances generally, and navigated around them just to circumvent their whole question and answer session, because apparently the surgery was still ongoing. So after he has escaped their midst after so much effort, Dr. Boughz headed to the doctor's quarters. On getting to the doctor's quarters, Dr. Boughz met Dr. Maiwa, who was actually making a very good use of his period of recess to go through some clinical research papers and medical academic journals, and Dr. Boughz was really, really impressed by this site. So when Dr. Maiwa actually noticed the presence of Dr. Boughz in the room, he took a very brief break from his study in an attempt just to, casually greet Dr. Boughz. So Dr. Boughz and Dr. Maiwa actually exchanged pleasantries. So having exchanged pleasantries, Dr. Boughz was questioned by Dr. Maiwa about the development stage of the surgery, because Dr. Maiwa knew full well that Dr. Boughz participated in that surgery that was conducted on Chief Arikuyeri. But to his greatest surprise, Dr. Boughz responded in his stentorian voice that, Dr. Maiwa, I will only respond to you if and only if you will answer my question. Dr. Maiwa got so bemused about this response, so he decided to keep his cool, and with an absolute surfer, he asked, what is the question? Then Dr. Boughz, still in his stentorian voice, said that, how can surgical expertise be attained? Ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me that the vibration of this man's question actually reverberated the old doctor's accommodation to its foundation, all thanks to the acoustics of his vocalization and the cacophony of his phonations. So, can you believe that this question actually flew in the air, such that other doctors heard this question, and by hearing it, they were able to successfully eavesdrop on this conversation, and by doing so, their curiosity was actually stirred up. So in twos and threes, they started trooping into the room where Dr. Boughz was and where Dr. Agbo and Dr. Maiwa was. So they decided to bombard Dr. Maiwa with a tsunami of questions of that related nature. Some were asking, Dr. Maiwa, how can surgical expertise be attained? Some were also asking, Dr. Maiwa, how can surgical skill be improved during surgical practice? To be candid, Dr. Maiwa got so overwhelmed by this question. So having been overwhelmed by the inundations of these questions that were asked perfunctorily, Dr. Maiwa decided to give an avalanche of response satisfactorily. So do you want to hear what Dr. Maiwa said? You want to know? Like, you really want to know? Okay, now I say that the curiosity of my audience has been really, really stirred up. So Dr. Maiwa said